tonight's program is FT8 for that all new one for you. Plus, our speaker has promised us some secret techniques for CW and SSB. And earlier during our happy hour, some of our participants are hoping that that will help them with Beauvais Island and Croissant and everything else. So Anthony Luscre, K8ZT, has presented and written extensively on a number of things. And on our webpage announcement, I listed his radio website as well as his blog. So please take a look there if you want to find out more information about Anthony and the stuff that he is doing. But without anything further, Anthony, I want to turn it over to you, and we'll be all ears. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. If I could get a thumbs up if you're seeing the presentation. Very good. Well, thank you. Good evening, everyone. So tonight we're going to talk about FT8 for an all-time new one. Plus, for those of you that really aren't into FT8 and FT4, I'll give you a couple secret technique for CW and single sideband. So we're all looking at the month coming up here, and we're drooling over some of these DX stations coming up. I know I've still been trying to work the FT8 myself. So this is my contact information. Now, there will be homework in today's presentation with over 80 slides and many links to outside resources. You'll want to go through the slideshow on your own afterwards so you can get to the resources. And to do that, the slideshow is at tiny.cc/FT8-ATNO. So tiny.cc/FT8-ATNO. I'll give that again at the end. So first of all, that's FT8, and that's FT4, and that'll be the last time you'll hear them today, because you really don't have to hear these because you can't decode them with your ears. So you may run into these things on the bands and say, oh, that's loud, that's sort of obnoxious, and my wife won't ever let me have volume in the room when I'm running FT8 and FT4. She'll yell across the room, turn that buzzing off. But it's one of the fastest growing modes of amateur radio. It's been hard to miss, but you may be wondering how to get started and why you'd want to. Why do I do FT8, FT4? Well, I actually started with JT65, which is the predecessor to both of these, and it is a slow mode. JT65 would take almost a minute to do the transmission each time, so it was very slow. So it's my multitasking mode. While I'm reading email, writing on the computer, etc., doing presentations for groups, I always have FT8 on in the background so I can work a new station. It's great with the low power, and I operate all QRP here in the shack, 5 watts, about 107,000 Qs. It seems that the bands are open more often when using FT8 and FT4. You'll find bands that there's no one else on. I use it to fill in the missing state and band combos, and I've actually almost completed that now. I now have 10 bands, worked all states, 5 watts with FT8, and I need 2 more to complete the 11th band, so I need Alaska and Hawaii on 6 meters, and then I'll have all 550 contacts for worked all states, all 11 bands. This is my shack. And I'm sitting right in front of this right now. It's not quite this clean right now. My main radio is a K3S 5 watt, 10 watt version sitting down here in the bottom corner. And so when I'm typing, I can just run FT8. The other reason why I do FT8 and FT4 is I don't have a big yard. My yard is approximately 75 by 165 feet. I am lucky enough to squeeze a small tower in there. I have a 50-foot tower and a 3 to 4 element log periodic Yagi in there. I have an 80-meter sloper coming off in one direction. I have a 60-foot wire with a loading coil in it for 160-meter sloper, and then I have a 43-foot DX Engineering vertical that you can't see in the trees here. So I don't have a big antenna farm, and as I said, I'm running 5 watts all the time. So it's been very helpful to increase my DXCC, worked all states, and total QSOs. It allows me to use bands that often seem dead, 10 meters, 12 meters, and 6 meters. I was working on eSkip quite a bit over the last couple of years when the sunspot numbers weren't quite where they're at right now. And I can call CQ even as a QRP station and get polyps of responder, something that never happens on phone. FT8 can greatly benefit my DXCC totals, especially on the lower bands. And here's my current worked status. I have almost this many in confirmed. A couple bands are a little bit lower in confirmed, but this is my work counts. And you'll notice that on 160, I have more contacts with FT8 and FT4 than I do with CW or single sideband. On 60 meters, the vast majority of my activity is with FT8 and FT4. 30 meters, about the same. I do have quite a few CW, but the others catching up. On the other bands, I do a lot of work, so I have both CW, single sideband, ready, etc. totals, but on those lower bands, the FT8, FT4 really helps. Just to give an example, 160, my three best DX contacts with FT8 and FT4, ZS in South Africa, a UA0 in Siberia, and the one day I saw come up on the screen what I thought was ES5, which would have been exciting to work Estonia from here on 160, but it turned out to be E51 in North Cook Island. FT8 is one of the many digital modes often referred to as sound card modes. They utilize a computer's sound card to bring in audio from your radio to be processed by the software to decode the information embedded in the signal, and they do the opposite for transmitting. They encode your information and then send it up through the sound card to be transmitted out by the radio. So we need to have some sort of interface between the radio and the sound card. And I purposely chose an old radio here because you don't need to use a brand new radio. Although new radios have built-in sound cards that make it a lot easier, you can use almost any radio, and I was using an Argonaut 509 on FT4, worked just fine. Of course, I had no computer control. I had to do everything manually on the nut with the knob. The other reason that a lot of people use these modes is the ability to hear a signal versus the background noise. With single sideband, we need about a plus 10 dB to get good contacts. A good CW operator might get down to minus 15 dB, but with FT8 and FT4, we can drop way below that. Very low signal noise required to complete the QSO. One DX operator can make multiple QSOs at the same time. Busted call signs are highly unlikely. Either you work them or you don't work them. Callers know when contact was made because you get a nice 73 back, and it's kind of obvious on the screen. You see your call sign, so you don't think maybe they worked you. And it requires less bandwidth than the typical split single sideband or CW operation, a lot less bandwidth. It works with marginal antennas or marginal propagation. There's less skill required on the DX operator's end of the QSO. They don't need to know CW. They don't have to deal with as difficult a power-up, although they do still have to deal with a power-up. There's no tuning to find responders. You're not operating split and tuning around and searching for the responders. They're all showing up in one section of the band. There's less busted call signs. There's no language obstacles. And there's no weird phonetics on phone, which I thank goodness for. Now, what is the problem with the Expedition FT8 use? Not all hunters are proficient in FT8. So you get people calling, first of all, you get people who don't have their station set up properly. They don't understand the specialized operations such as Fox and Hound, MS multi-streaming. They don't know how to choose the transmit frequencies or the times, the even odd time slot. They have improper settings with their radio or sound card. And it also requires some additional equipment. It's a newer mode for many operators. On the downside, the maximum QSO rate is normally about 60 QSOs per hour using standard protocol versus a much higher rate with CW or single sideband. Now, the use of MSHV, this multi-stream process or Foxhound or a combination of both can greatly increase those numbers. They can almost double or triple the amount of contacts someone can make as opposed to just using FT8 straight. One of the other problems with FT8 use by DXpeditions is many DXers complaining. FT8 bashing. They hate anything new, anything they did not fully understand, anything that takes time away from their favorite most proficient or best equipped mode. And I would hear this with people bashing single sideband, saying, don't mess around with single sideband, just stay on CW and work me where I want to work you. There's also the desire to complete other modes for DXCC credit. People want all the different modes. So if the station's hanging around on FT8, they complain because they're not getting the mode they want. And they don't want the unwashed to have an equal chance at extremely rare DX. There's a lot of people really worried about Beauvais saying, I spent years perfecting my DXing and now some joker who's just got on the radio last week is going to get Beauvais before I do. So there's that complaint that takes place. And as with any mode, there will be pirates, jammers, etc. It doesn't prevent that from happening. And jamming can be just as effective or deleterious to an FT8 DXpedition contact as to any other mode. So are you an FT8 basher? The old timer says, FT8 is destroying amateur radio. The old timer says, I will never do FT8. The newbie says, PA5 ABC was just spotted on 20-meter FT8. And immediately the old timer says, how do I get on FT8? And the old timer then asks 100 how-to questions and follow-ups. It's remarkable how much people love a mode when it's going to be the way for them to get an all-time new one. What can FT8 or FT4 do? They can automatically log the information from the contact into an ADIF file, so there should be no transcription issues. It's easy transfer of electronic log to Logbook of the World, EQSL, and your master station logbook by both you and the DX station. It lets you know how strong stations are decoding you. It gives you dBs as opposed to a 599 DX exchange or contesting exchange. It works with almost any single sideband radio, including VHF and UHF. By the way, not this weekend, but next weekend, if you want to do a little bit of DXing on VHF and UHF, give FT8 a try. What can FT8 and FT4 not do? They're not a rag chewing mode. They're not good for long contacts. If you're interested in that, think about JS8 call or PSK31. They only let you do 14 characters at a time, so they're lousy for rag chewing. They work without they will not work without a computing device. There's no radio that does the decoding of these modes automatically. They won't work with a CW only radio. So if you have a radio that can't send different tones, it's just CW, then it won't work with that. They won't work a station without an operator. Some of the myths about FT8, FT4, FT8 requires the internet to make QSOs. No operator is required. No operator skill is required. There is no homebrew or kits for digital, and only new radios can be used. So let's debunk some of these myths. This is the myth that there doesn't need to be someone at the location. PSK Reporter, which is very similar to the reverse beacon network, is a great way to see who's hearing your signal. Not necessarily worked them, but they're decoding your FT8 signal. And PSK Reporter showed for over 20 minutes that Antarctica was hearing me just fine. The problem was there was obviously no operator sitting there to respond to my CQ calls or to my responses to him. And all that was happening is the radio was hearing me, but there was no one there to call me back. So that's the one that got away. That was on 160. So let's talk a little bit about getting started. Now, many of you probably are already using FT8, FT4, and this is from my original presentation. I'll give you the links to the original presentation that has all the details, but this is sort of a shortcut portion of it. You basically need an HF radio, a computer with a built-in sound card or sound card interface, separate, and then the software, which is free. You need a method to generate the audio with the computer, either in the radio or an interface. You need a way to key the radio's push to talk when transmitting, either using CAC control, a sound card interface with built-in keying, you can use the radio's Vox, or what I did with my 509 is I manually push the talk button. The radio has to be capable of single sideband transmission. Now, these are some radios under $1,500 that are fairly recent, either new or recently discontinued. Some of them have built-in sound cards, so you can immediately hook these up with a USB cable and be ready to go. Some do not have sound cards in it, including some current production models such as the 891, which is a great portable little radio but does not have a built-in sound card, and the ICOM 718, which does not have a sound card built in. Most of these other radios have been discontinued. Some radios don't really need a sound card. All you need is some isolation. So the original K3, not the K3S, which is on this list, the KX3 and the KX2 can operate with just simple cables. You need a computer running Windows 7 or later, Linux or OS X. You can also run it on a Raspberry Pi. It doesn't have to be an extremely fast computer. You do need a fairly decent monitor, and that's one of the problems with some of the Raspberry Pi setups. And you might even want a second monitor for additional screen space for the waterfall and everything. The software WSJTX is free. It has both FT8, FT4, and a number of other programs in it. And then some helper software, which I find useful, JT Alert, which is for Windows, or Alarm JT, which is for Linux or Macintosh. They're both free, and I'll show you those in a few minutes here. You also need to have software to maintain a highly synchronized time on your computer. Windows time synchronization is not sufficient. You need a third-party software to be able to do it. The synchronization software in Linux is sufficient, though. And then you need another helper program. PSK Reporter is actually an online program. You don't need to download it to use it. If you click on the link here, it'll take you out to the WSJTX site where you can get the software. Maybe.
Yeah, could I make one quick comment?
Mm-hmm.
There you go, SourceForge, very good.
Yes. That's actually the one I wouldn't suggest you go to. I would suggest you go to this site here.
It's no longer at that site.
It's no longer
took it down. That's what I was going to say.
It's there. It's not coming up for some reason searching for it. I'm not sure what the deal is, but yeah, you might want to use the other site, the SourceForge site. You can still download it to other pages, it's just not coming up the way it did before. So putting it all together, you need to install the driver software for the radio before you try and interface your radio. Make sure the driver and software is installed on your computer before you connect the USB cable between your radio and the computer. Set the baud rate of your radio so that you can interface it. Connect the interface cable, determine the COM port. And I'm talking about Windows software now, and I'll be talking about Windows throughout the rest of this. Determine the COM port that the radio's on. You can test it with another program like N1MM or any other program that has CAT ability. If the radio has a built-in sound card, or if you're using an external sound card, it'll be a little bit different. Here's some examples of external sound cards for radios that don't have them built in. Right now, if I was going out and buying a new one, I would go with the DigiRig Mobile. It's about $59 plus the cables. It performs as well or better than the Signal Link. You're going to need to set up the radio properly, though. And there's a bunch of handy guides for setting up different radios. There's many other radios available. These are just radios I've helped other friends with, so I have these links here. You can click on these. It has information. I think that's a YouTube video from him. No, that's a printed video. And it tells you all the steps you need to set up on your radio to do it with the the ICOM 7300. I wrote one for the K3S many years ago when I first started doing JT65. That's why it says JT65 on it, but it's the same setup. So you need to set up some settings on your radio. And one of the things that these all say, or if they don't say, you need to know is you need to make sure that you set your radio up with the widest bandwidth possible. No extra filtering or anything like that. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. I'm going to skip over a couple of these things here. I would suggest that you make sure the sound card in the radio or the radio interface is not designated as the default device in Windows sound control panel. Install the WSJTX software. You need to configure it all, and I have all this information on configuring it in the full presentation. If you're running Windows, you need to use a time synchronization software. These are 3 free ones that'll work. This is the only thing you need the internet for. There's no internet used in making the contacts, but you do need to make sure your time is synchronized. And I was at a cabin in Delaware for field day a couple years ago, and then I stayed for a week and gave out a lot of FT8 contacts when it was brand new. But after a couple days at the cabin with no internet, my computer's time would start to drift, so I'd have to go to McDonald's, go through the drive-through, buy a milkshake, use the Wi-Fi to synchronize my computer, and then go back to the cabin. Well, I could have did the other option, and that's get a little USB dongle, and that'll do the same thing for time syncing purposes, but you don't get a milkshake out of it, so I'm not sure which is better. Before you start the WSJTX software, always make sure all the cables are connected and the radio is turned on. If the radio is not turned on or you don't have all your cables set up, it'll go fishing for a different COM port, a different sound card, etc., and you'll run into problems. Now this list looks a little long, and you can actually view it when you go to the slideshow, but this is the list I gave all my friends that I helped with. I said, go through this list before you call me on the phone when something doesn't work. So it talks about computer sound card settings, time synchronization. If you set your band filter narrow instead of maximum, you won't hear anyone. If you have the radio in the wrong mode, you'll have problems. If you're using FT8 when you really want to use FT4 or vice versa, it won't work. And then these 3 little boxes, which I'll talk about later, and special activity. And then, is the radio working on other modes? I had a friend call me. He couldn't figure out why it wasn't working right. He lived very close to me, so we tried making a contact, and I was able to make a contact. But he said, I can't make contact with anyone else. He went out the next morning. He called me later and said, my antenna coax is laying on the ground. It fell off the antenna, and that's why I was able to contact you through the coax, but no one else. So everything else still has to work. This is a typical screen for a conversation on FT8. In this screen right here, there's a station calling CQ, and I'm answering him. So I double clicked on him and I was calling CQ and he double clicked on me, sent his call sign. I responded back with my report, and he gave me his report. I responded back, and then we said 73 and we were all done. This takes 15 seconds for each of these 7 steps to happen. So it can take up to 3 minutes to make a contact sometimes. Using Foxhound mode, it takes a little bit less time, but it still is time consuming. If you're looking at the screen, the panel on the left are the stations that you're decoding. The screen on the right are the stations that you're either sending to or receiving from when you're trying to make a contact. These are the people that you're trying to interact with. If you look at some of these, we'll talk about them a little bit more detail later, but this person's calling CQDX. This person is in a contact. So the station we're decoding is M0IHT. He's contacting SP8. We can't actually hear the SP8 right now. The frequency we're on, we can choose the frequency by using this little drop-down setting here, or we can type the frequency in. If it's a special frequency for DX stations, you're typically going to need to type that in. You then enable your transmit, and you can also halt your transmit. It also tells you what mode you're in at the bottom. And this little time slider down here shows the progress of each of the time slots. You can either be transmitting in the even odd, or if you have that unchecked, in the even if you have that checked, or in the odd if you have that unchecked. You need to choose the mode you're going to operate and so forth. As far as the frequency goes, you can use the little drop down when using one of the standard settings, or you can also click in this and then type in any frequency you want. So this is what you're going to be doing for most of the DX stations, because they're going to be using different frequencies. There are 3 little boxes. Hold transmit frequency. Always keep that box checked. Do not uncheck that box. If you uncheck that box and you double click on a signal, it will change your transmit frequency to match the station you're calling. You don't want to do that. the call first only is important when you're calling CQ. So when you're answering other people, it doesn't matter what you have set there. And the auto sequence means that as soon as you establish contact with other station, it will continue by giving the signal report to them. So you want to have that box checked. So I suggest you check all three of these boxes and leave them checked. Now, one of the integral parts to WSJTX is the band map. And I'm going to go ahead and flip over and show you this live. So let me just bring up the program. In the band map, and I'm going to change to another frequency because I'm not on a frequency that. So now we're on FT8 frequency for 40 meters. Let's close WN1MM. We don't need that up there. And we'll look at the band map down here, and you notice that I'm seeing all the way from 0 up to 2500 kilohertz. I'm sorry, 25 hertz. That's because I have my filter open, so I'm actually copying a full 4,000 hertz of the band. The complete opposite of what you want to use filtering for on single sideband and CW. When we're operating here, we want to see the whole band. And before I transmit, I want to find an empty spot on the band and use my little clicker. So now I'm transmitting right here in this empty spot. I don't care where the station is, as long as they're anywhere in this band map. I don't want to be transmitting on top of anyone. I don't want anyone transmitting on top of me. I want to be in the clear to be able to get my signal out. So it's a little bit opposite from what we normally do on CW. This display is coming from JT Alert, and this bottom section is coming from JT Alert. So these are not part of the program. They're little helper programs that tell you more about it. They give you a different display. This part right here and the band map are what come in WSJTX. So now that I have an empty spot, I can take any of these stations that are in green calling CQ and double click on it, and I can possibly make a contact. We're going to wait for the next round here, or I could double click it on JT Alert and go that way. Notice it's showing me the location of the station. That information is being pulled in from QRZ.com. So I am using the internet to be able to do that, but that doesn't affect me making contact with the station. So what I've done once I double clicked on that, it turns on my enable transmit and I start transmitting. I send his call sign followed by my call sign followed by my grid square. And I'm going to change the focus here so it's a little bit easier to see the screen. So notice I'm transmitting again, and they didn't respond. I'm going to transmit one more time, and then I'm going to try someone else if I don't get that station. Okay, I didn't get him, so I'm going to try someone else. I'm going to try this station right here. It's Tango India 2 VVV. So now you notice I'm sending his call sign followed by my call sign followed by EN91. Now while we're waiting for him, we'll explain what these columns mean. The first column is the time. The second column is their signal strength. Third column is the difference in time on their signal versus my computer. Normally these will all be around 0.1 to 0.5. That means your computer's synchronized fine. If anyone's out of that range, it means the problem is on their end. If all of these are very different, they'll show up in red. That means your time is wrong, not their time. You're not right and everyone's wrong. The next row is the stations that you're decoding on this side here. The ones in green are calling CQ. The ones in gray are stations I've worked before. Like that one right there. I'm going to double click on this N4 station here in Florida. We'll double click on him and I'll transmit and send the signal to him. He was +1 here. That's a medium signal. The other people I was trying were all minus numbers. That doesn't mean I'm not going to be able to work them, but notice when I went going on the band map here, someone's crawled in on top of me. So I'm going to move my transmit signal up here out of the way so no one's on top of me, because I'm not going to work anyone if someone's calling on top of me. The nice thing is, though, we don't have to worry about whether we're interfering with the station we're trying to call, because we're not calling anywhere near where they're at. This particular station's right here with the green that we're calling up here. He'll hear me just fine Doesn't matter where I'm at in this band map for the station to hear me, because he should be seeing the whole thing just like I am. Now, there are some radios that have a narrower bandwidth to them, so they may only see 2,000 to 2,500 hertz. So I would suggest if someone's way at the bottom of the band map, you don't want to be above 25 hertz. If they're in the middle of the band map, you're probably fine. And we're going to switch bands here because there's 40 is just so crowded. I'm going to move down to 160. Switch my antenna here. So notice all I had to do was use the little drop down. Now I'm on 160. The frequency is in black, which means it's the standard frequency. I'm going to double click on this. That's not possible. That's from the previous decode. This little gray line here shows me that there's still the 40 meter. Of course, as soon as I changed bands, someone answered me. Now we have to wait every time. We're on FT8, so it transmits for approximately 12 seconds, takes about 3 seconds for the computer to decode everything, and then we do the next cycle. Right now I'm going to be transmitting uneven, but I'm not transmitting right now. I'm just listening. We'll wait one more time and see who we might want to work. Stations in gray already worked. This W1 is working this N8J. What we'll see now is we'll see just the opposite on the other time slice. We'll try working this guy right here, this W4. Notice we're hearing a LU8 DPM. Unfortunately, he doesn't QSO. I've already worked him before, and I even sent him an e-bill, but he just doesn't do QSLs. So I haven't gotten that confirmed yet. It's also showing me orange because it's a new zone for me if I would get that zone confirmed. So he answered me now, so it's in red. And what happens is I will automatically sequence. I'm going to send back to him. He sent me -4. I sent him an R for Roger and a -6. So that's how strong he is. That's how strong I was. If everything goes according to plan now, he should send me a 73 because we're done. I sent him he sent me a signal report. I sent him a Roger and a signal report. He's going to send me a Roger 73, hopefully here. We got to wait for this time. There it is, Roger 73. It'll pop up. I hit this button to log it. I'm sending him 73, and notice my enable transmit turned off because when it's done with him, it's transmitting right now, but when it's done with him, it won't continue transmitting because it's sent a 73. If I want to call CQ, I could turn this enable back on, go back here and mark CQ, and now I'll just let it CQ in the background. So that's basically how this works. Let's go back to the slideshow and finish up a couple things, and I'll come back and answer questions and show you more things. So let's change this, get the whole screen. So again, here's what the screen looks like. And if I want to work this F5 right here, I can't, I'm not decoding him. I'm hearing the UA3. So the stations on the left are the stations that are being worked by the stations I'm hearing. So if I double click on this, I'm going to transmit a signal to the UA3, not to the F5. And here's what we just saw before with the sequence. I'm calling CQ here. The person responded to me. He sent my call, his grid square. I sent back a +12. He sent me a Roger 10. I sent him a Roger 73, and I didn't wait long enough, but he sent me a 73 after that. Here's another case where I'm answering a station calling CQ. The same thing again. Now, with some stations, you need to use advanced or special modes. So you go into the setup, you go to the advanced tab, and then you go to special operating activity and you choose what you want. The most common mode that's used by a lot of DX stations is Fox Hound mode. They transmit as the Fox, you transmit as the Hound. So let me just show you how we do that real quick here. Let's just minimize that for a second. I would go up here to File, Settings, Advanced, and I would choose Special Operating Mode, and I would choose Hound. I'm going to turn that off because I don't want to use it right now, but that's what I would do. For other special things such as field day and other things, you would also use this, but right now we're not going to bother with that. I'm using the demo version, the newest test version, the release candidate, and I can actually turn the hound on from here now in this version. So if you get the newest version 2.6.0 release candidate 5, it has the turn the hound on from right here. Now we'll talk more about hound in a moment. Let's go back to the slideshow. So I have information here on the Fox mode that you can click on for more information. But there's two modes that a DX station might use. They might use the Fox Hound mode where they're the Fox, or they might use MSHV, which is multi-stream decoding. And the difference is, I'll show you in a moment what they look like, but they're using this multi-answering system. So they can answer up to 3 sets of stations at a time when they're using this. So it speeds things up. Both the Fox mode and MSHV should not be used by average stations. They're just designed for rare stations or DX. Here's the difference though. If you're trying to tell whether it's Fox Hound, in Fox Hound, on one line, you'll see multiple reports on the same line. This is typical of Fox Hound mode. In MSHV, you'll see multiple lines from the station. So here we had one line with the 7 Papa. Here we have 3 lines with the LA4SIA. Now, they can use a combination of Foxhound and MSHV. In that case, you would see something that looked like this with a line that looks like this. So if you're ever seeing more than one station in the same line, you should turn Foxhound on. If you're not seeing more than one, don't turn Foxhound on. So if you're trying to work FT8 WW, he does not work Foxhound. He only works MSHV. You'll see anywhere from 2 to 3 lines of decodes. If you see someone using MSHV, but you're seeing multiple call signs in one line, that means they're using Foxhound. And I worked someone else while we were sitting here because I had my CQ on in the background. Some other operating tips: reduce power output settings on your radio to avoid overheating your transmitter. This is a continuous duty cycle mode, so whatever you would feel comfortable running on your system with RTTY, you can probably run the same thing on FT8 or FT4, but don't think you can run the same power that you can on single sideband or CW without possibly damaging your equipment. Make sure your radio's filtering is set for its maximum bandwidth. Turn off DSP, DNR, any type of digital filtering, notching, speech processing, noise blanking, all should be off. After you transmit a few times, you can see whether other stations are hearing you, even if they don't respond to you, by using PSK Reporter. And PSK Reporter's link is right here. This is what it looks like. Now you say, why is it PSK Reporter? Because it was being used for PSK long before FT8 and FT4 came out. You put your call sign in here, and it will show you all the stations that are hearing you. Come on, here we go. So these are the stations that are hearing me around the world. Doesn't necessarily mean I've worked them, but they're hearing me in the last 24 hours. So here's the 3 Charlie that I worked earlier today. Here's a station in South Africa. I work Congo, but notice there's nothing hearing me in Congo because he doesn't have an internet connection that he's feeding PSK Reporter in. The way PSK Reporter works is everyone who has the setting turned on in their radio under in their WSJTX software, in the settings section under reporting, there's a box here that says enable PSK Reporter spotting. If the person has this on and their radio is decoding any stations, it will automatically forward them via the internet to PSK Reporter. So these are all stations that heard me. That doesn't mean that someone was sitting at that table in Japan when that station heard me 2 hours ago. And they're color coded. So all these light green are the ones on stations that are hearing me on 160. The pink, when I hover my mouse over, were the stations on 10 meters. The purple was 40 meters. The orange was 80 meter FT4, and so forth. Now you might say, well, you know, I don't use FT8. I don't plan on using FT8, but how can I use PSK Reporter? Well, if you know someone in your neighborhood who's a PSK Reporter, a FT8 user, just put their call sign in, and that'll show you who's hearing them around the world, and that'll give you a good idea of where propagation is open to for your station. Gotta wait for this to load here again. Come on. There we go. So this is what Jim was hearing. He hasn't been on for since 7 hours ago, but he was hearing all these stations. So I would know the propagation would probably be open to there also. Some essential operating tips. Set the radio to the desired band. You may need to use a custom frequency. So for example, if the station says that they're operating on 20 meters, but when I go to 20 meters, it says 14.074. I don't want to use that drop down because the station is using a special frequency. So I just highlight this and I type in their frequency. 14.090 is where I worked the TN8K this morning. I hit enter and it changes my radio frequency to 14.0, and it also puts it in red to show me I'm not on a standard frequency. It's just a little thing to remind you that you're not on a standard frequency. You need to actually decode the DX station before transmitting. Please do not blindly transmit assuming that you're going to work the station. You have to hear them or you're not going to be able to complete the contact. So there's no reason to call until you hear them. Choose a spot on the waterfall that has no stations transmitting, especially do not transmit on the DX station's frequency. Make sure you're transmitting on the time segment that the DX station is listening on. So if the DX station is transmitting on even, you want to be on odd. If they're on odd, you want to be on even. If you're transmitting on the same time slice as them, you will never make a contact. Before trying to work the rare DX station, try working some standard FT8 with everyday stations so that you know what you're doing before you jump on. So if you wait until the day Beauvais comes on and you try and make that your first FT8 contact, I don't think your chances are as good if you spend a little bit of time making sure you know everything works. Make sure your radio, sound card, interface, computer are all working, gives you a better feel for how to operate, and it gives you practice time without competition or pressure. Before transmitting, make sure you determine what mode the DX station is using. Are they using standard FT8 or FT4? Are they using Foxhound mode? Or are they using MSHV? Or are they using MSHV with Foxhound? Make sure the box labeled hold transmit is checked. This keeps you from jumping around whenever you double click on a station, because if we would double click on that FT8 WW at the bottom of the screen where he's transmitting, that'll change our transmit frequency on top of him, and your friends won't like it and you probably won't work them. Now, of course, you can hear while you're transmitting, so periodically you have to stop and make sure no one's crawled underneath you. If you have a second receiver or you want to use an online SDR, this is a way to check to make sure no one has gotten under your signal. If necessary, move to a different spot in the waterfall. Never transmit on the DX station's frequency. If using Fox and Hound, make sure you always transmit above the 1000 mark on the waterfall. So what that means is if they're doing Fox Hound and I go to the waterfall, I need to make sure that I'm above the 1000. If they're not doing Fox and Hound, feel free to transmit anywhere in the band map. If they're doing Foxhound, you might transmit at 1500, and what happens in Foxhound mode is they can actually move your transmit to a different frequency. So don't worry if all of a sudden you see your call sign show up here and your frequency changes that you're transmitting on. That's perfectly fine in Foxhound mode. It shouldn't happen in the other modes, but in Foxhound mode, you might see that happen. Use traditional tools for choosing band frequency. Read the DXpedition's website for information on what bands and modes and special frequencies they'll be using. FT8 activity operation mode, whether they're using Foxhound, MSHV, etc. Check DX cluster spots. Do not transmit blindly when you see a spot. Make sure you can decode the station. So go to the frequency and then decode the station before you transmit. You can use normal propagation reporting sites and tools to figure out what time of day you want to do it. Make sure you have the PSK reporter spotting enabled so that you can see what stations are hearing you around the world. Here's some other tools. These are all links. Here's information on PSK Reporter. Here's PSK Reporter itself. There's also another system called ham spots, which is very similar. Instead of being a map, though, there's a table of frequencies and reports. Now, that concludes the FT8, FT4 portion of our program. But I want to give you a couple more things before we take questions. So you might say to yourself, that was interesting, but I'm still more interested in working the DXpedition on CW or single sideband. I'm not interested in this FT8 crap, no matter what you told me about it. So some of the things, remember, there will not always be a choice. Sometimes you'll have a station that will only work it. So don't complain on the DX cluster that he's not changing to the mode you want. Try working him on the mode he's working. If you do not work it on FT8, if you do work a station on FT8, remember it doesn't count for FT8, it counts for data in your DXCC. So DXCC consists of 3 modes: phone, CW, and data. Please do not complain as others want to work them too, and the only way may be FT8. But if you want a single sideband CW tip, I have a tip for you. This is top secret. You're not allowed to use this when I'm on the band trying to work them, so make sure you listen for me first before you use these special tools. I'm sure you've already learned a number of techniques for working split DXpeditions. Listen to instructions of the DX station. Set your radio for the split operation, then listen to see the frequency of the stations that are being worked. That's the important part, because that's where you want to call. You can either use your VHF AB switch, which sometimes can be problematic if you forget to hit it again, or if your radio has a reverse switch that'll let you hear the other band without actually changing your VFO settings. Then calling on that frequency, or up a little bit or down a little bit, depending on the style of the DX operator, whether he's moving up and down the band, you transmit and hope to be the next station worked. Well, the problem comes in, before we get to that, in addition to the VFO, AB switch, or reverse, etc., to hear other stations, some are also able to listen on a second receiver. So if you have a second receiver that you're able to listen on, that could be very helpful. Second antenna. Some of the problems, though, if you're trying to listen at your local location, you can't easily hear while you're transmitting. And with higher frequency bands, one of the problems is, whether you're using 1 or 2 receivers, you can't hear the stations that the other station is working because they're too close to you and the skip zone is wrong. So wouldn't it be great if you could listen at the other end instead of listening from your station? So the secret technique is having multiple receivers, not at your location, but anywhere in the world. These stations you can listen to even when transmitting. You won't interfere with them. You can even move them around the world so you can hear almost any or all stations, even with differing propagation conditions. And of course, we want it to be free. So the secret is free online tunable SDRs. These are software-defined radios around the world that you can tune. I have 2 guides on this, and these guides are actually written for high school and junior high kids that I do programs for. Quite often I'll have quite a large group, and I want to do a specific activity one group, and I want other people to work on their own. So I devised this little presentation. Talks about online software-defined radios. This tiny.cc/freerx. There's 2 main groups, the Web SDR group and the Kiwi group. There's some other ones, but these are the 2 we're going to be most concerned with. I have basic instructions for a typical Web SDR interface, and I have basic instructions for a Kiwi interface. I then have some information on shortwave listening, some DX summits so they can find some spots to try and go out and find, and information on the bands. But you know all this stuff, so that doesn't really matter to you. All you need is this information on using these things. So let's go to the first one, Web SDR, and you'll see that there's over 100 stations around the world that you can go to, and you can pick any of these stations and likely be able to tune in and listen. So let's just pick one here. We'll pick the let's pick one in the US, so let's pick this one in Utah. And this one has multiple receivers, so we can pick the color of the receiver we want. Let's listen on 80. So we'll pick this one right here, the blue one. And you'll hear the station in the background, and we can put in the frequency when we want to listen to. And I picked the FT8, FT4. Let's set the bandwidth and everything here. We're in the wrong mode. We got to switch modes first here. Okay, now we're in CW. We can zoom in on the band map here. And now we can simply double click wherever we want to listen, or we can drag this. So let's imagine for a second that this is the DX station calling right here. We can then go up and listen and see visually and audio wise where the other stations are at. We can even do this while we're transmitting. We can listen to see where the other stations are transmitting and see where they're at. Because we're not close to this station at all, we're not going to interfere with it like if this was a second receiver at our location. Let me go ahead and stop that sound so we don't hear the background while I'm operating. I have a whole presentation on using them available at this other link. This goes into more detail about how to use them and as an amateur radio operator and the things you can use them for and talking about interest on it. It's not just a short 4-page paper that I put together for the students. So you pick an online software-defined receiver that is closer to the DX station. That'll allow you to hear the stations that are outside your skip zone. You don't need to worry about your transmitting overwhelming the local receiver or rotating a beam. You can even use a visual audio cable to feed the output of the online software-defined radio into WSJTX if you want to decode FT8, FT4, or into CW or RIDI skimmer if you want to decode CW. You might ask yourself, why not use a remote transceiver resetup? Well, that's a great way to work the other station, but that means that your DX credit will be in whatever location the remote station's at. And these remote transceiver setups usually cost money, or you have to put them up yourself. These online software-defined radios are free. That means that your transmit location will still be the same. You'll still get credit for the same location. And you will not be accused of using your remote station as an unfair advantage because all you're doing is receiving. There is no cost, but feel free to donate to the sponsors of the online software-defined radios if you find them useful. So that's my top secret trick. Now these are the general tricks for people that may not be as accomplished. I have one called How to Make That QSO Get in the Rhythm, Know the Rhyme, and Dance the Dance. It talks about techniques for operating in general, and this is designed for beginning operators, but you might get some tips out of it that are useful. Things like how to break into that power-up is very similar to merging on a freeway. And I talk about different types of exchanges, different ways of having advantages, knowing some keywords, Q symbols, a few foreign language words, or maybe your call sign phonetically with a number with the native language, and so forth. So just a bunch of tips here on making contacts. The second one is how to evaluate your signal using things like reverse beacon network, online software-defined radios, ways that you can listen for your own signal and see how you're doing. And again, you can click on either of these links from the main slideshow presentation. Here's the full slideshow presentation on FT8 and FT4 that goes into great detail on how to set everything up and what all the settings are. This is like 100 and some slides long. I don't remember how many it is. It just keeps getting bigger all the time. But that's, if you're not familiar with FT8 and FT4 at all, that has all the details in it. There's also a 7-page quick start guide for FT8, FT4. And I also have an article that I wrote for our local newsletter on how to use PSK Reporter as a propagation tool, whether you're using FT8 or FT4 or not. I have some additional reading here. These are all links. This is a great guide, the ZL2 IFB guide on FT8 operation, and a bunch of other guides on them. And then something completely different. Just want to throw a quick thing in here. This is a presentation I did recently. I'm not sure how many of you take part in the CQDX Marathon. It's a yearly contest where you count up all the DX entities plus a few extras, 5 extras that are on the Worked All Europe list, plus the 40 zones, and you get to submit an entry each year. And I noticed the raw scores just came out. Anyone out there enter the DX Marathon? So I have a whole presentation on the DX Marathon. If you've never done it before, it's a good project. You may even want to think about it as a club activity where you compete against each other during the year. You might even want to have monthly settings on it. But the good news is, I have some good news and bad news for myself in the raw scores. The good news is I'm in the top scores. The bad news is I came in second in my category. So no trophy again, just a certificate again. And again, that's it for the presentation. Here's the link, tiny.cc/FT8-ATNO. I'll take questions in a moment. Again, my contact information is here also, and also a list of all the presentations I've put together over the last 3 years. There's slideshows for almost all of them. There's videos for many of them, and some of them have extra resources in other columns. So there's a whole bunch of information. If you're thinking about getting a new call sign, I have a whole thing on choosing your ideal call sign, on logging software, contesting software, etc., etc. So I will go ahead and take questions now.
Well, first, Anthony, let me just say thank you. And I guess my first question to just kick it off is, when do you find time to sleep?
I'm retired. I don't need to sleep anymore. No, I do find time, but if I have spare time, I'm on the radio. If I'm not on the radio, I'm doing a presentation. And even when I'm doing a presentation, I'm on the radio because I still have FT8 going in the background here. So my wife says it's ADD.
Is that a new operating mode?
Yeah, she calls it worked all squirrels.
Do we have questions for Anthony?
Yeah, I'll start out with one. Actually, I've
Yes.
got several, but I'll start with one. Anthony, have you noticed any difference in the receiving station's ability to decode you based on where you are in the passband when you transmit? Is there a difference transmitting lower in the frequency passband as opposed to higher from their perspective of getting back to you? And
That's a great question, and the answer is yes. It does matter, and the further answer is it matters even more with some radios. Some radios, if you get too far from the center of the band, they drop off considerably. So find out about your particular radio, and if that's the case, you can always change the frequency a little bit and transmit in the same position, and you'll be in the middle of your bandwidth. So you can always go up here and say that you don't want to be at 14.090. You can change the 14.091 because it's just relatively where you're at. But the other thing I find sometimes is I'll find stations that are way down at the bottom of the band, and if I'm transmitting up very high, it's not a matter of my radio not performing as well. It's that they have a narrow bandwidth and they're not looking all across the band. So sometimes I try and stay close to them because I don't know how wide they have their bandwidth set.
well, my question was more, if you're trying to work a desirable DX contact,
Yes.
they're having lots of people call them. They're decoding, their screen is red. They've got all
Yes.
kinds of people. How do they decide to pick you versus one of the other 15 stations that are calling? And is there a bias? If you're lower in the passband, do you show up first?
No, you do not. If you'll notice that they're all random here. See, the passband is all random. They used to show up first. That used to be a trick that I could use a couple years ago. That trick is 3 years past its prime now, and you can't do that trick anymore. So this is something very interesting. I do that whole talk on, I've done this talk for years actually, on choosing your ideal call sign, especially for contesting or DXing. Now, when you're choosing your call sign, you want to take another aspect into it. How visually impressive is your call sign? So now having those 3 X's in your call sign might actually make you stand out on a digital mode, whereas you would not really necessarily stand out on voice or CW, and you'd get tired sending all that. Here, it doesn't matter how long your call sign is. So visual appeal of your call sign might be an important thing. Of course, being a DX station or being in the same area as the person's trying to work might influence them, but no, you don't get an advantage by changing location. But you do check to make sure to see whether your radio's power drops off when you move to either end of the extreme. And a good way to do that is to use one of those remote SDRs and just go ahead and see how your signal to noise ratio changes when you move through the different portions of the passband. And some radios are very, very noticeable. They'll drop off whenever you move considerably away. The other area that you want to stay in the middle for, and this is not so much the radio, but when you're operating on 60 meters, you don't want to get too close to the edges because you can be outside that narrow passband. Other questions?
Hey, Tony, you mentioned you had ADD.
Yes.
That all day digital?
Yes. Yes. That's why it's on all the time. I don't ever turn this off except for when it's lightning.
Well, if nobody else is going to ask, I've got a second one.
Yes, go right ahead.
Why is FT4 nowhere near as popular? And I realize there's a signal to noise decoding difference, but I'm very disappointed. I do run a fair amount of digital, and it's rare to find people on FT4 that I haven't worked. And I don't understand why people aren't there if band conditions are good.
Because they don't understand how important it is to move to FT4. That really ticks me off, especially on 6 meters. Because on 6 meters, what happens quite often is it's not the signal strength, it's the duration of the opening. You'll have an extremely short opening that doesn't give you enough time to make an FT8 contact where you can make a very quick FT4 contact. So I always poke around on FT4 whenever I can. Unfortunately, the only places I see it are during contest and on maybe 3 bands. I see a little bit on 20, I see a little bit on 17, and I see a little bit occasionally on 40. I never see it on 160, I never see it on 15, and I think it's a big mistake. And I think especially with the higher bands, the way the openings are on the higher bands, we should be using FT4 a lot more. There's no reason on the way 10 meters has been open lately to not be using FT4 on 10 meters.
Well, anytime I start operating, I always start with FT4 on the highest band and work my way down. And I'll usually call CQ a few times just to see if I can wake anybody up. And once in a while, somebody will come back. But I keep asking people that are digital operators why they're not on FT4 all the time. And well, you can't be there all the time because you'll run out of people.
Yeah, and to give you an idea of the fact that I do like to get on FT4, let me bring this up real quick here. This is what I do. This isn't just an FT4 and FT8 thing. I'm sort of always like to play with statistics. So I take my log and I dump it into a spreadsheet to do analysis on it. So these are my FT8, FT4 spreadsheet, and this gives you a little bit of idea of my numbers. So I have worked, where's the, not gonna be right here. These are my FT8 totals, and these are my FT4 totals. Now notice on a couple bands like 20 meters, I have 4,300 FT4 contacts, but I have 7 on 6 meters, 60 meters, 10 on 160. There's just not a lot of reason for that. So I have 16,990 FT8s, and I only have 6,251 FT4s. Now, part of it has to do with the fact that FT8 has been around a little bit longer, but really, that's a big. And I have never seen any of the expeditions working it until today. I worked the 3 Charlie on FT4, and I had a hard time working them on FT8, and I worked them the first time I called them on FT4.
Well, with all the presentations you make, you have a chance to be an evangelist for FT4, and I hope you take advantage of that.
Well, I never do. You can never tell that I'm opinionated when I do my presentations. My wife always says, if you make the mistake of asking me my opinion, I will always give it to you.
It's Michael V3TKI. I have a question about. I have an MP with a signal link, and I use JTTX rather than WSJT. But what I find is that if I'm transmitting or set up around 1500, sort of the middle of the bandpass, my radio frequency stays put. But if I go further up, I don't know, let's say 2000, what I find is that if I'm, let's say it's 10-131, I'm calling Crozet or something, and what I find is if I'm too high in the band, that every time I transmit, it changes the carrier frequency, and before I know it, I'm a couple kilohertz off. Do you have any idea why that would be? Or is this just an artifact of my radio, or what?
That's an artifact of your radio. That's one of the radios that's notorious for dropping off on the edges.
Well, that's what you mean by dropping off. You mean the frequency?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, so I just have to keep an eye on that and correct it every so often, which is what I do. Okay.
Yeah, and the trick is there's a couple things you can do. One is you can change your band map, but you can also go into your settings here and try playing around with one of the settings, and that's the setting under radio. I'm sorry, under split operation. If you come in here and try, yeah, well, yours is another program, but in here, if there's a split operation setting, you might want to try that also.
Yeah, well, I'm set up using Fake It with.
I would try using rig on yours.
Okay. All right. And
that'll actually change the frequency so it keeps you in the center of the bandpass. So with your radio, I would definitely. Now I'm running with Elecraft K3. I would suggest you use none, but on your radio, I would suggest you try using the rig setting.
I'll try that. Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks.
You're welcome. Now notice this station right now is calling me and I'm not answering because it's probably one of you guys. So I'm going to make sure that I answer him here. Yes,
anyway,
go ahead.
Tony, is the only way to distinguish between FT8 and FT4, especially if they're transmitting in the same frequency area, by the sound?
The width. The signal, the width will be a lot wider. It's almost twice as wide on the band map.
Yeah.
But the other thing too is one of the problems is some of the earlier modes you could do JT9 and JT, I forget what the other mode was. You could decode them at the same time on the screen. You can't decode FT8 and FT4 with the same settings on WSJTX. So you will only decode whichever mode you're in. So if you see a bunch of stuff in the waterfall and you're not decoding anything, double check down at the bottom of your screen to make sure you're in the mode you thought you were in. I've had friends tell me, I've been calling all day and no one's answering me. Well, they're in FT4.
Of course, if the station is really strong, that'll also be a wider bandwidth. So.
Yeah, but it shouldn't be that wide. And if you see signals that are that wide, like this guy's actually overdriving. This guy here is probably overdriving this signal. Let's see who's the culprit here at 1100. See if it's one of you guys. W8U. Oh, he's also close to me. He's not that close. No, he's not that close to me.
Also, if there's a call sign with brackets, and that's usually because the call sign's really long, like a portable flash in there. And if that happens to be the DX station, it'll be a while before you find out what that DX is, if you want to call them or not.
Yeah, what'll happen is you only see that when they're actually calling, when they're answering other people because of the combination of the other station and their call sign and the portable, et cetera, it can be problematic. So call sign length does matter in that aspect, but it's interesting that I just noticed the phenomena that like this station, like the WW1LL is very attractive to double click on here. So there is another whole thing about the visual aspects of your call signs that we never cared about before, except for on your license plate or on your QSL card. So that presentation is in my list. It's called Choosing Your Ideal Call Sign. There's a video of it, and there's also the slideshow.
Thank you, Tony.
Other questions?
Yeah, I've got another one, I guess.
Yes.
It's more of a statement than a question, but you might want to remind people the importance of being on Logbook of the World. I've got my FT8 and JT alerts set up to where I don't even see stations that are not reporting to Logbook of the World. So if you're not using that as a confirmation method, a lot of stations won't even respond to you.
Yeah, and there's really not, if you're a DXer, there's no reason not to use Logbook of the World. I mean, even if it's not your preferred method of doing it, you still should be on. So I dump all my logs after every contest. Almost every couple days I dump for my regular log. I dump everything up the Logbook of the World. And the other thing, here's the one big advantage. If you're not an FT8, FT4, the Logbook of the World confirmation rate many-fold higher than it is on any other mode. So that's the good news.
Tony,
Yes, Richmond.
This is Richmond EL2BG. Thank you very much for all of the secrets. I am on FT8 right now, and when you showed the picture of the PSK, I could see my location out there. But again, I love FT8 because it's very difficult here this time with the phone. So FT8 has been my main mode for the past year now. So thank you again for all of those secrets.
Well, I'm going to bring up the reporter. We'll show everyone where you're at here. Let's do that real quick. Bring up PSK reporter. And let me put my call sign in here. What band are you on right now?
Right now, I'm on 20 meters.
So what I'm doing is I'm putting his call sign here. We're going to see who's decoding him around the world. So you can also put the DX station's call sign in there and see where they're being decoded. So that's another little propagation trick. So right now, you can see that, of course, he's being heard very well here, not too far away in, what is that, Gabon? Or is that, I can't see, Cameroon. And, but he's also being heard up here at minus 14 dB up in Canada, and minus 18 dB down in South America, and minus 18 dB down in South Africa. Let me switch this color changer off. My blue filter came on. Okay, there we go. So yes, it's a great tool to be able to see where stations are being heard and who's hearing them around the world. I'm going to switch over to 20 here and give you a call. I'll swing the beam around. Okay, so while I'm swinging the beam around, any other questions?
Yeah, Tony.
Yes, Ron.
The one gentleman mentioned using a sound card with a, I assume it was a FTDX 101 MP.
Yes.
If you've got a built-in sound card, why or what advantages would using an external sound card interface give you?
Typically none, but that radio doesn't have one in it.
It's the FT1000 MP and it doesn't have a
yeah, it doesn't have a sound
oh,
card.
the
in
1000 MP. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, you know, I get some people that say that they're using an external card, and I don't see a reason that. The other thing I hear all the time people talk about is they want to use single sideband mode instead of data mode. The radio has a data mode. Use the data mode. I've never seen a case where if you have USB mode and you have, I mean, if you have a data mode and you use USB instead, I don't see any advantage. Now, the only thing is you can be lazy and not set a couple settings, but then the problem is when you go to use the radio on single sideband again, you got to change all the settings back. So if you have a data mode, use the data mode for FT8 and FT4. Don't do it on single sideband if you have a data mode.
That's especially important because you can end up with a hot microphone too.
Yes.
Every so often, if you listen to WSJT or listen to those signals, you'll hear people talking in the background, and it's because they're running in sideband rather than data mode, and their microphone's hot and they don't know it.
Yeah. So I just had someone just today on there's a reflector for WSJTX telling people that it's better to use the FT891 on the sideband mode instead of the data mode. And on that radio especially, that radio is a pain to adjust the bandwidth on. And if you keep doing that, every time you switch back and forth, your bandwidth has to be adjusted.
Yeah.
So set all your settings on data if you have data capability. So when I switch between data and phone on my Elecraft K3S, I don't have to worry about it because I know it's set right. Now, the one problem with the K3S is if I operate RIDI like I did this weekend, it changes my bandwidth on all my frequency, even though it's a different data mode. When I switch back to the data mode I want to use, I still run into problems. All the W1AW portables have started. There's W1AW portable 0. Other questions?
Comment.
Yes.
Sometimes when I've used my 3000, my mic input is on the front, and for data, it goes in from the back. One of the things I've sometimes forgotten to do is switch the mic inputs. So you could think that you're transmitting and it's just going nowhere.
Yeah, you know, because
Make sure you got the right mic input.
yeah, and because a lot of people turn the volume down because you really don't need to hear the volume, it's good to have something in the line so you're seeing your signal. And in my presentation on successful operating, I talk about the fact that having an external watt meter is not a bad idea, just to see that needle flip up and down, as opposed to the one on your radio where you might not notice it. So it can be helpful. You sit there and transmit for a long time, especially I have 2 different watt meters on my 2 different sets of antennas. So if I'm transmitting on my beam and I'm not seeing anything on that watt meter, that means I'm actually transmitting on the wrong antenna, because I should be seeing power coming out of there. So yes, that can be very helpful. Also, by the way, because you don't have to worry about listening to your signal, it's a very easy mode to operate remotely from your house, as long as you can have Windows or whatever operating system you have sharing ability. Screen share like Chrome extension or something like that. As long as you can see that stuff, you can easily operate remotely, where it's much harder with CW or phone where you have to worry about getting the audio across the remote connection. Here, you only need the visual connection to see the software. Okay, this station, I'm hearing it. Radio Whiskey Zero Charlie radio, and I should be able to hear him. He hasn't answered me. Now see, notice he just sent 73. And the other thing too about if you're just getting started, it doesn't hurt to call the station when they're talking to other people, because you're not calling on top of them. So actually the best time, see now he just turned me, the best time to call someone is when they're saying 73 to the other station. And I just got him and he says I'm minus 17, I'm running 5 watts, he's plus 13. Big difference in signal strength, but it doesn't matter, I'm still gonna get the contact. And minus 17 dB, I don't think I'd be able to make a phone contact with him with that kind of signal strength, and pulling a CW out would be very difficult. Now, someone may have just crawled underneath me here, or he changed frequency and transmitting on my frequency, which I don't think he's doing, but yes, he did. No, he didn't. We're done. We made our contact. See, the problem is I got to see where why this station came up underneath me, whether he's on my time sync or he's on the other time strand. So I probably would move after this. Other questions, comments? Just curious if you could let me know, anyone out there enter the DX Marathon?
Well, aren't logs past due now already?
Yeah, they are past due, but I'm talking about for next year. Get ready for next year. If you guys want, I'll come back and do a presentation on that, on how to do all the entry and all that stuff when it gets closer to time. But right now is when you want to start working the DX. The nice thing about that is I started doing this actually before the DX Marathon. I always, I've already worked a bunch of things. So like worked all states is not a big deal anymore because I've worked it so many times. So what I do each year is I actually go in and I reset my log to see whether I've worked all states already. So I have first worked all states. So right now I've worked only 27 states. I haven't really tried. During the North American QSO party, I'll take care of that real quick. But then the DXCC, I'm at 63. Actually, I'm at 65 because I've done 2 more and I haven't uploaded them today. So I'm at 65 countries for the year. But that's the nice thing about the marathon. It means that you want to go out and try and work an Austrian station, or you want to try and work that DL, because it counts, doesn't normally, it's normally not rare DX, but everything is when you first start, if you start your totals up new each year.
Well, I've got to admit, I looked at it last year and I looked at it this year, and I couldn't figure out an easy way to submit my log or sort my log. And so I just went out of heck with it and I didn't do it. So well, it's 2 years in a row.
In my presentation, I even at the very end, I have an addendum that shows you how to export from all the different logging software export your ADIF file. And I couldn't find some how-tos for a couple of log software, so I recorded the videos myself. So I have videos on how to do like the 7 or 8 major logging software to export it and then to bring it into the software to transfer it into the scoring sheet. Other questions, comments, complaints? See Kevin with all complaints.
I know this may be a little rude, but maybe too much information. But one thing I like about FT8 is at my age, I do go to the bathroom a lot, and you know, if you're trying
Yeah,
to
you
call
could do it.
something, by the time you come back, it's worked.
Now with JT65, because it took a full minute, you could go make a cup of coffee and come back. You can't quite get a cup of coffee made with FT8. And with FT4, you got to have everything right there because you don't have time to jump up and run across the room. But yes, with FT8, you have a little bit of time. JT65 was great. Get up, go make a cup of coffee, come back, sit down. So yes, but you know, I do a lot of writing. I write a quarterly column for CQ. I write for a blog. I do a bunch of presentations, and I also am doing other things besides radio stuff. So it's a nice mode for me to do while I'm doing other things.
Well, Anthony, this has been a great evening. You know, we've had a really broad discussion on this digital mode. It's very timely given the DXpeditions, and just finding out about all of the resources that you've put together that are available to us, to DXers, to amateur radio operators everywhere. It's just been fantastic. So we'll have the links when we publish this video on our website. And I think it would be fun to have you back again sometime to talk about the DX marathon. So with that, I'm going to wish everyone a good evening. And again, special thanks to Anthony.
73, everyone.